Hello and welcome back to my channel. You may have seen a couple videos ago, I actually started a new series where I've been deep diving at different interior design styles and showing you how to identify your favorite styles and how you can best layer each style to create that perfect eclectic mix in your home. And I did mention in that previous video that I do have a few of these like furniture menu guides. I have them available as a free download on my website. So if that's something of interest to you, definitely check out the link at the bottom of this video. Just to recap my intention for these videos, I find a lot of the times people have an idea in their mind of what they want their home to look like, but they just can't put an actual name to their particular style. And just to help give you a visual on what these styles look like, different pieces that you can identify within each style, and just the best way to use them in your space. I also have another series on my channel where I take your favorite styles from the comments and show you how to layer them together in a space, and I show real inspiration images that utilize a few of these styles and mix them together in a room. So as always, feel free to drop your favorite styles in the comments if you want to see how I would layer them together in a space in one of those videos. So we're starting off strong with mid-century modern interiors. I feel like this is actually one of the most popular styles amongst everybody, especially online. I feel like most content creators within this niche usually do focus more with a mid-century modern or a vintage style. I would say the real appeal of this style is the fact that it feels very warm and welcoming, and I personally would also categorize it as kind of an organic style. So overall, it's just going to have just a more natural and casual approach. Mid-century modern also embodies a lot of clean lines, so I find it's very popular with this style. You're going to see lots of vintage pieces, typically done in a wooden finish. There's not going to be a ton of overt detail on each piece, but overall it still has that really cool kind of modern take. And because this style focuses so heavily on wood tones, I find that bolder pops of color mix really well with this style. Specifically shades of greens, mustards, even burnt oranges just pair so well with most mid-century modern furniture. And like any vintage style, when you are trying to incorporate this in your home, I would really focus on genuine pieces or authentic materials. Often with mid-century modern, we can see lots of replica furniture or mass-produced items that are meant to look like this style, but they aren't the real deal. And while purchasing genuine pieces that can be a little bit more expensive, I personally find this style to really be available on places like Facebook Marketplace or even when you're thrifting. And people don't necessarily know what they have when they are selling these pieces, so often you can find some really quality items for a very affordable price point. And this style is actually one of my favorites to layer with. I find a lot of people actually will use mid-century modern more as their base style, and then they'll layer other styles in with it, but this would really be the core style that they're working with in their home. I find this works really well because most mid-century modern items are quite large. When you're incorporating them in your home, typically we want to focus on larger wooden pieces like credenzas, TV stands, even large kind of wall units are just so well done in this style. And if you're looking to infuse smaller bits of mid-century modern in your home, some of my favorite pieces to incorporate are things like armchairs, coffee tables, even ottomans are just super fun to incorporate. Postmodernism really falls within a similar category to mid-century modern, so I do find when you're searching up this style online, very often you will see it paired with mid-century modern elements. How postmodern kind of differs from mid-century modern is I find it's a little less organic. Typically in postmodern interiors, they tend to feel a little bit more like a gallery setting, so colors are usually going to be a little bit more unexpected. Often I find there's more of a white kind of blank canvas in a space, and then there's bolder pops of color. Use of more angular and geometric shapes on furniture pieces is also really popular with this style. And usually there's a little bit more of a twist or a quirky element to a furniture piece, where mid-century modern tends to be just a little bit more classic. While the shapes and colors and furniture pieces themselves tend to feel a little bit more maximalist, Overall, when you're looking at a postmodern space, I do find it tends to be a little bit more minimalist in nature. When you're looking around, each piece really stands out. It doesn't typically feel as layered as other maximalist styles. And this style doesn't really favor one material over another. I find that the best postmodern spaces have a variety of materials in the room. Things like wood or marble, even acrylic are just great materials to layer when you're trying to achieve this style. A great example of this is actually infusing postmodern with French country. I find if you're using a style like French country or something that's just a little bit more rustic, sometimes the space can feel quite heavy and just really layered, where if you're infusing just a little bit of that postmodern take, it really is just eliminating a lot of the excess items of the room, and it really just allows each piece to stand on its own and feel very cohesive. And because this style is quite bold and playful, I do feel it's important to be layering other organic styles with postmodernism. This is really going to help balance the style and make it feel a lot more warm and welcoming, which sometimes postmodernism is hard to achieve with. Scandinavian interiors is very popular, and I do kind of just want to highlight two different versions of Scandinavian interiors. One is what I would consider just the classic version of what a true Scandinavian interior is, and the other I'll classify more as like Danish interiors, and usually this tends to go slightly more mid-century modern. Both of these I would consider to be Scandinavian, but I think for the purpose of this video, I'm going to focus a little bit more on the classical version of Scandinavian that sometimes has these little bits of mid-century modern elements throughout. Common themes throughout this style is they're very light and airy, and typically there is a very heavy emphasis on wood. Furniture pieces themselves are usually quite functional and simple. I don't find they tend to have much of a traditional take. They're usually just very straight lines, very clean interiors. And while I would consider Scandinavian interiors to be a little bit more minimalist, I do find the smaller accents and the smaller kind of accessory details tend to be slightly more maximalist. So where a room might really feel like a blank canvas, when you're adding those little bits of personality and character, this is really where you're adding bolder pops of color, you're adding a little bit more design and detail. It's always going to be in these smaller accents. And just like any other style, Scandinavian interiors are best done when you're using honest materials. So we want to be thinking about genuine woods. Even in textiles, you can look at things like linen or even a wool. You really want to be avoiding materials like wood veneers or even something like a faux stone or a faux marble. And because the style is very warm and welcoming, I find it pairs best with other warm organic styles. This is why mid-century modern layers so well with Scandinavian interiors. And of course, there is kind of that symbiotic relationship, just knowing that a lot of mid-century modern items are actually Danish made. So that's why there's also kind of that influence within these two styles as well. And because Scandinavian interiors are just very clean and simple, you can take them in either direction if you want to bring it just a little bit more rustic or a little bit more refined. It really is just a great blank canvas that you can layer other styles with. Retro or vintage spaces really do categorize a variety of different styles within that style, but I did want to highlight them because sometimes this is kind of more of the aesthetic we're trying to achieve in our home, but we'll maybe focus too much on one of these retro styles, and it doesn't necessarily give us that overall vintage or retro theme that we're trying to achieve. What really would categorize a retro space in its own right would be focusing more so on true vintage pieces and finding very authentic and one-of-a-kind items that you really have to curate in your home. This style really isn't achieved by going out and purchasing pieces new. This would be somebody who is a little bit more of a collector, or if you're trying to layer this style in your home, you're being very selective about each individual piece that you're bringing in. This style uses lots of bold colors, and where I would say it differs from other vintage styles is you might not necessarily be focusing on very organic and natural color schemes, you might focus a little bit more on fun, playful pops of colors like bright blues, reds, even yellows and oranges. And when it comes to color, I would say anything goes. There isn't usually a hard and fast rule when it comes to color schemes in a retro space. Overall, the goal is really to have fun, vibrant pops of colors that are really playful in the space. This style is very nostalgic and fun. I do find people who incorporate an element of retro into their space generally have a lot of personality, and each piece really tells a story. Of course, a retro or a vintage space is always going to pair really well with other vintage styles, like for instance mid-century modern, but I do find there is a nice twist of taking a retro space and adding more modern elements, or even a little bit more sophisticated elements can kind of help balance this style in your home. And I will say this style can really start to feel a little bit more like a time capsule instead of a home if you aren't correctly layering other design elements with it. So this one is a great one to add lots of little bits of personality, but I definitely wouldn't consider it as your overall style in your space. Cottage interiors typically have a few different directions they could go. The three main ones that I generally see are English cottage, French cottage, or a little bit more of like an Americana cottage as well. Overall, within any cottage interior, typically there's going to be lots of different layers of materials and textiles. The overall feeling of these spaces is also going to be quite cozy and warm. I do find English cottage interiors to be just a little frillier and a little bit more whimsical in nature. And I love that English cottage usually has a very playful take on mixing patterns. Usually there's lots of stripes and florals, and typically there's just lots of textiles everywhere, whether that's through toss cushions or throw blankets, and there's always going to be area rugs no matter where you look. And while French cottage interiors are very similar, I don't find them to be as whimsical as English tends to be. Typically, a French cottage is going to feel just a little bit more natural, a little bit more neutral, and a little bit more light and airy. I will say French cottage interiors focuses a little bit more heavily on wood materials. Usually in a French cottage, we see lots of kind of more rustic wood finishes, especially on things like larger dining tables or just larger wooden pieces. And in my opinion, the Americana aesthetic of cottage style is what I would typically consider a little bit more of like a classic cottage. Usually when you think about having a cabin in the woods somewhere, this is more so what you envision it to be. Overall, I do love these styles. It's a very warm and welcoming look in your home. Sometimes, however, it can feel just a little too stuffy and a little bit too maximalist. So sometimes if you're mixing in other styles that are just going to help alleviate some of the maximalism in the room, that can really help in just toning down this style and just helping it overall feel warm and welcoming, but just not too in your face. These spaces are going to be very similar to the cottage aesthetic, but I will say there's a little bit more of an equestrian or ranch or western style mixed in. Typically when you're looking at either the colors, materials, or patterns, they're not going to be as playful and whimsical as the cottage interiors are. Usually they're going to be just a little bit more elevated or sophisticated. And the difference really between a country interior and a provincial interior is country is going to feel just a little bit more casual and relaxed. Again, with that kind of Americana aesthetic, it's also going to have a few more Western details mixed in, where provincial is going to feel just a little bit more elevated. Typically, this is where you're going to see some of those more equestrian or formal details being added. And because the style is a little bit more traditional, I do find mixing in classic antique pieces is a great way to achieve this look in your home. And the same thing goes for the smaller accents, specifically things like lighting, textiles, even some of your smaller accessories. I find this feels just a little bit more curated and authentic if you're actually going to estate sales or thrift stores, or even just purchasing anything secondhand, even off of Facebook Marketplace. This is really going to give you that curated and collected feeling with this style. Overall, this style feels pretty rustic, and if you take it too far, sometimes it can come off just a little bit kind of cowboy in your home. So again, if you're working with a different base style, mixing mixing in some country or provincial accents can be kind of a fun nod to this style. But if you are focusing primarily on country in your home, I do think it is important to be mixing in other refined styles with it so it doesn't feel too rustic or, again, giving you that cowboy feeling in your space. Coastal interiors is actually one of my favorites. Just like any of the other styles we mentioned in this video, you could take it in a variety of different directions, but I do find overall the theme of this style is just very relaxing and refreshing. If you're somebody who doesn't love bold pops of colors and you do like to keep your home very neutral, this may be the style for you. Typically, it's going to be very light and airy, and any colors that we're introducing are always going to be just a little bit more soft, a little bit more muted. Even pastel tones are pretty popular within a coastal style. And I love the use of natural materials in this style. Beachy elements like seagrass or rattan just pair so nicely with some of the heavier wood details. I also love the theme of soft seating through a coastal interior is usually going to be items just covered in a very classic white linen or a cotton. So overall, it's going to feel very light and airy when it comes to your soft seating. And adding tiny little nautical details is a really nice accent with this style as well. Some of my favorites are in smaller things like patterns in your textiles. Even small accessory pieces are nice from this style. And one of my absolute favorite nautical details to add is actually in lighting. Adding these smaller nautical details is also going to help the space to feel a little bit more authentic. And I will say, if you don't want to overcommit to a coastal theme in your home, these smaller accents are just great to bring in to give kind of a nod to this style without overdoing it in your space. And because the coastal style relies so heavily on very natural materials, I do find it pairs really well with other organic styles as well. So that's all the styles we're deep diving in this video. Definitely let me know in the comments which one of these is your favorite. And again, if you do have a few style combos you want to see me break down in my next video, definitely drop those in the comments as well. If you liked this video or you found it helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And of course, if you haven't subscribed already, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.